Okay. Here we go. Hi, and welcome to this GreenEd webinar. My name is Michelle Ludwig, and I'll be your facilitator today. I'm a senior green building consultant, and I'm also one of the directors here at GreenEd. And since we're a bit new, let me start off by telling you a little bit about what GreenEd is before we get to the order of the day. We have been working in the sustainability and green design space as architects and consultants primarily for about 20 years now, and we've noticed that the education opportunities specific to green topics is very much lacking for both current professionals as well as those new to the market, in particular in how concepts and technologies apply here and now to our context in Africa. So we're creating and curating an online collection of courses on topics specific to green design and sustainability. We are on a mission to deliver best-in-class online education appropriate to the African context, and with that, build relationships with professionals so that together we can drive the green building movement in Africa. We want to provide you with convenient access to interesting, high-quality courses on sustainability in the built environment, green building ratings tools, and most importantly, how to get it done. Our platform provides you with opportunities for online courses that can be taken when convenient and can be paused and continued when suits. And when complete, we will also report your CPD on your behalf. With help from our sponsors, we are aiming to provide these to you at low to no cost. So have a look at our website for available courses. If you join our mailing list, we will keep you informed for upcoming webinars, which we aim to have on a monthly basis, and then also when new courses are launched. We are also hosting the webinars organized by the Living Future Collaborative in South Africa. These are the folks that bring you the Living Building Challenge and related topics. So we'll also keep you posted on their webinars. We would love to bring you what you want to learn. So if you have any suggestions for topics, please feel free to reach out to us on hello@greened.co.za. And also, if you know a sponsor that wants to associate themselves with one of these events, please get in touch. A quick note on our broadcast today. To make it more easily accessible across devices, we are intentionally using a streaming software. So no need to worry about cameras and microphones being on or off, and hopefully it's a more lightweight approach. We do want questions and comments and encourage you to ask these throughout the presentations by using the chat box you can see here. We can then address them in the course of the webinar and with the speakers. If you run into any video issues, just refresh your browser. It should be as easy as watching a YouTube video. For CPD credit, this presentation will be accredited for 0.1 Category 1 credits for SACAP and EXA. Your attendance is noted, and afterwards we will be emailing a link to a quiz where you can enter your details and we will report the CPD on your behalf. If you have colleagues who are not able to make it, or if you would like to review this webinar again, a recording and the quiz will be made available on the platform in about a week. So today's webinar is sponsored by Solid Green, Ludwig Design Consulting, and Apex Communications. And I think I can speak for all of us when we say that we want to move the needle when it comes to meeting the 2030 goals or the 2050 goals for things like energy efficiency, global climate change, and commitments that South Africa has made, as well as the architectural profession and around the world. And in order to do that, we're investing in education so that we can get as many people as possible to be doing good and great design and to start as a whole getting towards those goals, meeting those goals. So thanks for joining us in this. So today we're talking about biophilia, and granted I'm filling in for Marlise, who was going to give this presentation, but it's such an exciting topic, and we wanted to just give a bit of a high-level overview of what it is we're talking about before our expert guests climb into the more details of it. Biophilia literally means a love of life or love of nature. The term biophilia was created by biologist Edward O. Wilson in 1984, and it's defined as our innate and genetically determined affinity with the natural world by him. It suggests that humans possess an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. So then what is biophilic design? Well, Stephen R. Keller was a professor of social ecology at Yale University, and he's considered one of the pioneers whose research and writing has advanced this understanding of the connection between humans and the natural world. He helped pioneer the concept of biophilic design, an emerging field that promotes improved health and well-being by creating connections between people and nature in the built environment. And as humans become increasingly disconnected from nature in our daily lives, the task of connecting people and nature in our built environment becomes even more urgent. And so it is about purposefully integrating nature into our buildings and our design for everyone's benefit. What are these benefits? Well, incorporating direct or indirect elements of nature into the built environment have been demonstrated through research to reduce stress, blood pressure levels, and heart rates, while increasing productivity, creativity, and self-reported rates of well-being. So just looking at improved daylight, studies show that call center operators are able to process calls 6 to 12% quicker. And the school designed with good daylight can produce students with a 5 to 14% higher test scores, and they learn faster. And in hospitals, a view to the outside can result in reducing the hospital stay by 8.5%. So that might sound sort of a small number, but that has real bottom line benefits. So that's actually just money and profit and people healing faster so that you can treat more people. So we should not underestimate the impact that our buildings have on our well-being and our ability to learn or be productive. It's huge. So as designers, how do designers draw inspiration from nature and use it to connect us more with the built environment? Let's look at 3 key constructs quickly. The first is a direct connection, and this is the physical presence of actual nature in your space. So that's through trees or lights or plants or water elements in your space, and you have that ephemeral presence and an emotion. You just have that connection literally to nature. The second way would be indirect connection, and this is evoking a feeling of being in nature by using shapes, forms, or colors, or textures, or things that aren't really nature, like rocks and stones and sticks, but that evoke that feeling through, the shapes and forms you're seeing. So it's been proven that your subconscious mind sees these patterns and is making that connection without you consciously being aware of that. Example of that would be through like a pattern in the carpet or through using, wood material. And the third is human spatial response. And this is creating spaces that evoke a human response, or like an emotion, if you think, something that's exciting or relaxing, stimulating, or makes you curious. And that's also done through the built environment and what you're designing and how you experience a space. So some of the pioneers in biophilic design include Stephen R. Keller, who was a professor of social ecology at Yale University, and his research and writings advanced the understanding of this connection between humans and the natural world, and he helped pioneer the concept of biophilic design, an emerging field that promotes the health and well-being by creating the connections in the built environment. And then the other being William Browning, who's with Terrapin Bright Green, who's been doing this work for a couple of decades as well. The good news is there's lists you can use of how to get here. So for Stephen R. Keller's work, he breaks it down into 6 biophilic design elements, and then within those elements there's further attributes, and there's explanations of all these. So everything from facades and views and animals and plants and nature to biomorphy and biomimicry. There's a whole manifest here. It's very interesting. And then from Terrapin Bright Green, they've also broken it down into 14 patterns of biophilic design, and you can read more about these. We're also going to have a course coming up that's a more deep dive on biophilic design, so keep on our mailing lists and we'll let you know. So how can this be useful? If you're doing Green Building Ratings tool, these 2 tools, the Living Building Challenge and the Well Building Institute, have prerequisites or preconditions, meaning you have to do. Biophilia is one of the components you have to do to get this rating. We have a course on well building on our website available now, and the Living Building Challenge we run introductory courses on throughout the year. Those are live, so we can also give you more information there. So those 2 require biophilia. And these two, Green Star being the predominant one here in South Africa, as well as the US Green Building Council's LEED, which is used globally, these reward biophilia as innovation credits. So you can get rewarded, but it's not a mandatory to do. Not only is it good for people, but you can be rewarded in the building ratings tools. So there's lots of interesting resources out there to learn more about biophilic design. Biophilic design has been around for a couple decades now, so it's actually not that brand new. It's just now enjoying a more embrace into conventional design, which is fantastic. There's a couple free guides out there, and we'll put links to these things on our website, so you can go there to look. And that brings us to our headline act, and that is our guests from Parabola Architecture, who are going to tell us about their experience with designing the first ground-up building for Google. And it was very much informed by not only biophilic design, but a very holistic sense of design, which I'll let them explain more about. So I'm super pleased to be able to introduce Carrie Meinberg-Burke and Kevin Burke from Parabola Architecture. I've known them for a long time. I had the very good fortune of working with Kevin many moons ago at the firm of William McDonough and Partners, which is a pioneering firm in green design. And knowing both his and Carrie's work over the years, they have always infused everything they've done with this innate and remarkable sense of nature and how to incorporate it in the built environment. They'd like to share their backgrounds with you, so I'll let them tell you more about that, and we'll get on with it. So thank you very much. I'll send it over to you, Kevin and Carrie. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle.
Great. Thanks. Glad to have you. I'll let you carry on.
Hi.
Link your screen with me one more time, please. And it just disappeared, and I will.
Oh.
You can, that
okay.
I think it was on my. Yeah. Go ahead and.
Okay. 1 second.
You can introduce in the meantime.
Okay, we'll do. All right. So thank you, everyone, for your interest in our talk. We really look forward to sharing the experience we've had and giving you a little bit of background. As Michelle mentioned, Kevin was Bill McDonough's partner and for years, and they worked together on these efforts. And my parallel track was running my own small practice and ultimately designing and doing the construction lead on our house. And we're going to show you that as well. But I think our efforts have always been fundamentally informed by this appreciation for humans being part of nature, and the wealth of design information that's within nature that is not readily applicable to architecture without a process of developing those into design tools. And that's very much what our practice has focused on, because it's really not a one-on-one mapping, but it's this observational process of uncovering the patterns and information in nature and then applying it to architecture.
So as Michelle mentioned, I worked at William McDonough and Partners, was a partner there, and in the early 2000s, we were doing work with this new company, Google, and we were helping them establish master planning protocols for their work in Mountain View, California, where the Googleplex currently is, as well as their sustainability guidelines. So we worked with them for about 3 or 4 years. And concurrently with that work, Carrie was working with one of the real estate executives to design his home, which was designed all around primarily around the Living Building Challenge paradigm, but also had a sort of deep dive in the things that Google was really interested in the design environment. So it's just to say that although we're just a small 2-person practice, we've had a long-standing relationship with Google. And when we started Parabola in 2010, we worked with Google for a couple of years, kind of working on the owner side of the table, not as designers per se, but helping them redesign their global design guidelines. And within that, it incorporated all of the things in the built environment that Google's had a keen interest in over the years, including, but not just limited to, biophilic design. So they've always had a focus that's gone well beyond what they're kind of known for, which is the slides and the beach balls and the bright colors and all, but really designing environments that look to nurture the well-being of the Googlers and of the community, and to really connect them as much as possible to place and to their environment. So what we've found in the years working with Google is just very, very ambitious set of goals and objectives. One interesting thing, though, is that over the early years, they had never built their own building. They had always done what they called hermit crabbing, which was taking existing, sometimes Class A office buildings in Silicon Valley, sometimes Class B office buildings, and upgrading the interiors to their specifications. But they had never completed a ground-up building. And I think we've seen perhaps seen online some of the efforts that they've been doing sort of as a follow-up to the Apple campus. Google has developed and under construction right now are large and very impressive projects by Big and Heatherwick in Silicon Valley that are under construction. And while those were in the design phase, and as that was taking time to develop those buildings, Google came to Carrie and I, and kind of based on our other design experience with other clients, as well as our understanding of Google and the design guide, they asked us to work with them to design a living lab. And so that's what 1212 Bordeaux represents.
Yeah, and so the process for doing that entailed a very tight, a small design build team with a lot of experience and expertise. And a lot of our process, we'll get into this with our presentation, was really applying a type of streamlining to our own design process that is actually very similar to what nature implements. This idea of streamlining and trying to reduce turbulence, to allow decision latency to be reduced in the process. And so the ability to go from vision to built artifact, which is very much what our design process is based on, was something that was implemented there. So it was a very tight schedule, very tight budget. And we want to bring that up in part to say that biophilia is not an add-on or a luxury. It's something that emerged from our team's decisions around how to spend the resources, including money or budget. So budget, resources, time, resources, and physical materials. So we'll get into that as well to show you how defining the principles that led the project and maintaining the fidelity to those throughout the whole design and construction process enabled this building to emerge with these characteristics and qualities and win some awards that were not necessarily what we started out seeking. It wasn't a checklist type of approach to sustainability. It was the idea of infusing sustainability and biophilia into the design.
And the last thing I'd say is just that it was an intensely collaborative effort, not only with Google as a very engaged owner, but also with a contractor, design or builder, DevCon Construction, who's one of the largest builders in Silicon Valley and had done a tremendous amount of work with Google on these interior retrofits. We had done a project with them before, so we were familiar with them, and that was one of the critical aspects. Was Google was not just testing out what they wanted to build, but also how it was being built within this design build delivery process. So that became a big part of the story of the project. Sorry.
So I guess Michelle, we were just going to mention some, before you start the video, some of the awards we mentioned, just to give you a quick overview. It was a Keller Biophilic Award finalist, one of the three finalists 1 year. It was awarded Good Design is Good Business, the Design Build Commercial National Award, and we presented at that event as well. California AIA Leading Edge Award, the James River AIA Chapter Award, and Lead Platinum, which came really, again, not as a goal for Google at the time, but more it emerged because we were doing things together as a team that put it into platinum territory. So Michelle, if you'd like to share this is a video overview of 1212 Bordeaux. So this is a time-lapse motion capture to show you how it responds to the changes in light, both in terms of the reflectivity and absorption of the material of absorbing the colors, but also the dynamic exterior blinds that are designed to mitigate glare within the building. So it's very much tuned to site-specific forces.
Google has a long-standing interest in native plants and native ecologies, and there's a real effort throughout this portion of Silicon Valley and in the work that they're working on to re-oak the former oak savanna that's near the San Francisco Bay, and to provide indigenous and native landscapes throughout.
So part of this is an extension of designing the inside of the building and the outside of the building as one thing. So you can see the vast scale of nature that is represented in the scale and the long span of these trusses and the calibration of these clear stories, the warmth of the wood, and those are also detailed for acoustical functions. So you'll see the implementation of Biophilia went into great detail on all the various systems and structural system as well, expressing the forces of nature through exposed rusted steel.
Google, as an engineering culture, what we found over time and just interviewing different Googlers and working with them is they're really interested in how things are made and how things come together. And so the notion of exposing and expressing not just the steel structure, but really all of the systems became a really kind of key design criteria that fits their culture.
So we'll show you our presentation. Our goal is to help you understand how we implemented biophilic design in this actual built artifact. And our approach, as in Parabola, our approach has been, just as I mentioned earlier, to strive for uncovering forces in nature that evolve form as a design process. And that really can be unpacked as designing the experience, the physical and ethereal materials included, and integrating systems. And when we say design the experience, our goal is to do that as an initial choreography, and then the architecture is what gets designed to support it. And that could be seen as in contrast to making a form and then placing people within it, people and systems. And the other thing, in unpacking the physical and ethereal materials, it's important that architecture often is seen as a physical artifact, but that the ethereal materials like light and air and noise and smell, other sensorial realms, are actual materials that can be designed with. And then that extends into systems, and that the architecture is also not drawing any lines between itself and the systems that are serving it. And looking at the patterns in nature and just again going to an observational process with that, and uncovering some things that are even mathematically explained, like on the right is Murray's law, which is the nature's law of optimization, which shows or explains when branching structures fork off at an optimization point. We apply that kind of thinking, for example, in the design process to balancing performance and value. So looking at when do you reach that point where you've really optimized it before you start having loss in one area or another. And when Google came to us, one of the things that they asked for was beauty and simplicity. And as we all know, simplicity is not so simple. And So the effort it took to, and takes in architecture, the kind of investment in the design process needed to simplify the built artifact is something that we continually strive to hone.
So, as Carrie mentioned, this was a really aggressive schedule. It was 22 months from our very first sketch and very first meetings with Google to first day of business. And in the earliest days of the design, we had a chance to meet with the vice president of real estate, David Radcliffe at Google. So we really wanted to understand at the most basic level, what was it that he wanted the building to do? And he said, we want to solve for the things that we need to solve for in all of our buildings. We need to promote Googler focus by addressing light, air, and noise. And so that really became the mantra for the project. They didn't say they wanted a biophilic building, didn't say they wanted LEED Platinum or win awards. They were really, really keenly focused on this Googler well-being, but also these, as Carrie mentioned, these sort of ephemeral things, the light, air, acoustics of the building, because those are the things that they found, if they're not working properly, cause the greatest level of distraction, greatest level of complaints, and really inhibit the ability of Googlers to focus. So this mantra, and in some ways, in terms of like a biophilic design process or any integrated design process, we found that it really helps to kind of have that a simple set of clear directives that not only you can share with the owner and have a clear understanding, but bringing a builder on board and all of the trades over time, if they understand what the clear objectives are and where the focus is, that understanding really starts to get infused in the making of the building. So just to locate for you the project, we're in the very southern tip of the San Francisco Bay. You can see the San Francisco Peninsula up to the left, and kind of in the heart of Silicon Valley. And in some ways, the key aspect of Silicon Valley is there's really not a great level of urbanism there. It's a kind of suburban, it's somewhat unplanned development in an area that used to be really thriving farms and orchards, so peach groves and almond groves and such. And where 1212 Bordeaux was located was in an area that had been kind of Silicon Valley 1.0, tilt-up construction, and where Silicon Valley was more focused on manufacturing development. So our site had a former satellite design facility with a high bay and all. And that building was torn down, and the concrete was pulverized as using for some of the beds for the construction. And so part of it was creating a building that in some ways is creating a toehold for some of these aspects as this earliest stages of Silicon Valley start to transform to this new era of building.
And that's one of the Keller principles too, around really accommodating the context and the cultural context of the building as well. That's something else that, again, keeping in mind that humans are also nature, that we have our own ecosystems and our own networks that are important to consider in the design.
So we were fortunate, although the surrounding context was not much to speak of. What we did find on our site was this established grove of olive trees. And that became a really important kind of inspiration for us. They were lining the Bordeaux street, and we really wanted that to kind of be the reference point for the design, and the notion that perhaps we could lift up the space where Googlers are working so that it's almost the feeling of working within the treetops and surrounded by direct views of nature, starting with these trees that are on the west side of the project. So here you can see in the video showed that the western side that includes both this grove, but also a public plaza and a sort of urban space, which is shown on the right side of the slide, that includes this the bioswales with the native plants to treat stormwater. So trying to combine the social landscape with this indigenous native landscape.
And the previous building, the satellite manufacturing building, was actually further away from the street, and there was a parking lot between the olive trees in that building, and it had a very suburban feel. So one of the things we did was to study how close we could pull the building to the street to make much more of a natural urbanism. And that detail you see to the right is also celebrating the way that the drainage arrives at this bioswale treatment area. So there's this, again, pedagogical aspect to the building.
Now, Google had given us a program for the building, but they really, besides the kind of processes that they wanted to see in the plantings they wanted to see in the landscape, they didn't include a program for landscape space. But we found that if we situated the building on the site properly, we could create an outdoor private courtyard for Googlers that was kind of in the shadow of the building, which would be just to the north. So this is on the south side of the building.
Shadow.
Yeah, in the wind shadow, because in that location in the south part of the bay in the afternoons, there's a buildup of the breezes and winds start to build up on a daily basis. It can be as much as 15 miles per hour that are coming down from the north and northwest. And so we wanted to purposefully locate this outdoor space within that wind shadow. So there would be the comfort of being in the shade or choose to be in the sun, but also be out of the distraction of the wind.
And that's one of those things, it's a data point. You look at a windrose, but it has tremendous real consequences to whether people will choose to be in an outdoor space. And certainly with the pandemic, we have found and have heard that this notion that of this courtyard to be a viable outdoor workspace is really something that is obviously fitting the need to be an outdoor space for healthy air.
And one of the things interesting, just the way that in working with a company like Google, you really need to design in flexibility. The initial intention was that this garden would be the front door to the experience of coming to work. So you'd come through the public plaza, enter through that board form concrete wall into this garden, and that would be a type of threshold or reset before you go into the workplace. Unfortunately, security concerns dictated that the garden became a sort of exit-only space, and that entry had to come through, just be sort of channeled through the main lobby, which works fine. But our original intent was to let this garden space to be the transition zone. Mm-hmm.
We have observed, though, when people leave to catch the Google buses, and at the end of the day, they all flow down these stairs and in through the courtyard and gate as a way of leaving the space. So there is something about that as a touch point throughout the day. So when we talked about being asked to solve for focus, and that's the mission, of course, people need to be able to do their important work in the building. What we realized, in order to understand what focus is, we had to really understand what is it that distracts from focus. And so we created this spectrum from focus to buzz as being the range of kinds of activities that people engage in the workplace. And that in order to understand how to build focus, you need to create a buffer between buzz and focus in order to make those spaces distinct. So when we designed the building very much in section, you'll see that to the south, which is to the right on this drawing, we put the buzz zone next to that garden. And that is the area where you would have programs like cafes and lounges and places where people can convene and flow through. And then that buffer zone is where we have the meeting spaces and bathrooms and other service spaces and small phone rooms and such. That area has also a mezzanine that wraps around the building as well. But you'll see that part of this is creating a range of ceiling heights. One of the things in biophilic design with Prospect and Refuge, considering sight lines and ceiling heights and slots of space that create the perception of variety and right-sized ceiling heights for various program elements is something that is very much part of the engine room of this building.
So the spectrum became a really useful tool to communicate to Google and then to the potential users, but also to the trades and builders of just the nature of this building. It describes, in that colored spectrum, it can be in some ways used to describe daylight. So To the south side in the buzz space, it's sort of the warmer light qualities and where we could allow direct beam penetration to come in, to the kind of cooler light to the north side in the large workspace, the focus zone, where we really worked hard to eliminate direct beam. But it also could describe a type of acoustic difference between the spaces. The buzzy space, the red portion being buzzier, and the blue representing something akin to like a library reading room, where the acoustic sort of throttles down and it's more absorptive. So the spectrum became a sort of both a diagnostic but also a design tool. And you can see then how it's represented in the plans. One of the things in working directly and really closely in close collaboration with the builder, as we were looking at cost issues, the thing that John Castagnoli kept reinforcing was just simplicity in the plan and not having a lot of different bump outs in the plan shape and all. So we really wanted to focus on a simple plan with all of the complexity in the section.
And often in our experience, we found that buildings that have a lot of form drivers in the plan may not even be perceived in reality. That we also learned the same economic lesson on our own home, which we had a very disciplined, simple plan volume as well. That really doesn't necessarily relate to complexity of experience or richness of experience. That in part why we design so much in section is because that's the perceivable aspect of design. And it's possible to infuse qualities in section that belie the simplicity of the plan.
Plus, Google does have a sort of rhythm where a lot of meetings, a lot of video conferencing, where in those instances they don't need a lot of light, and so that's what's down on the lower level below the focus space. So we're also not only we're taking advantage of the sort of transitions from buzz to focus running from the south to the north, but also vertically in the levels, light levels and qualities that are needed as you move up and through the building.
So this is the lobby at 1212, and you can see the lead plaque. One of the things we wanted to make sure is that it was actually something integral with the structure of the building. So we used a palladium leaf, a gold leaf artist came in and applied the lead plaque, and in part because this is being Google's first completed ground up building, we wanted to really signify it's the whole project that won the lead award, not just an interior, which is more like what they had been doing up to that point. Of course, that bark wall is like the first cradle to cradle product. We wanted to feature that, and also this notion of the Google logo being something that, although in its brand usually features the colors, this idea that nature would shine through that it would create an emptiness for the imagination to fill in.
So this is all on that south side, the sort of red or buzz zone that Carrie had described. So as you move along the south edge of the building from that lobby through security, you arrive at this cafe or hub.
So notice sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, notice while you're looking at this, the direct beam light that Kevin had mentioned, and those acoustical sheer drapes can modulate, by users, modulate the glare, but also create some acoustical performance. So
this has the kind of buzz quality, the kind of the place for the famous Google free food, but also where people grab that first cup of coffee in the morning. But we found it was just the kind of warm up space, and really was a wonderful place to arrive in the morning to kind of start your day before moving into the building. So, and then as the weather is nice out there, when it's nice, you sort of spill out from this cafe to the garden that you can see directly beyond on the south side. But Carrie described then the need for that, in order to create focus, you need that transition zone, the buffer between the buzz zone. And so we're looking on the left from one of the conference rooms on the mezzanine level within the buffer zone, and then looking from the north back to that 2-height story sort of buffer zone that includes the core elements, the bathrooms and such.
There's also this idea at Google of wanting these casual collisions. And so the open stair and these light wells created that ability, but we also needed to solve for privacy and focus. So those acoustical railings that you see at the slats, they have 2 inches of acoustical cotton behind them. Those book ledges actually serve as both a acoustical block and a functional ledge and a privacy divider.
And one of the characteristics of biophilic design, and kind of which we translated in that notion of designing the experience, is shown on the left, of coming through the buffer zone from that cafe into one of these light wells. There's a moment, and we've noticed when we give people tours, everybody sort of stops there looking up to the north to the large space above, and there's just a sort of wow moment there. And it ties into that kind of innate feeling of sort of awe that people have, and also the begins the sort of qualities of prospect and refuge. And so the sense of being able to be within the lower level of an office building, but to have a view extending out to see the sky, to see clouds, to see the sort of north light. And then making your way up, the movement up through this internal stair and arrival into the focus zone.
We noted too that for stretching your eyes from your computer to a cloud can be anywhere from 2 to 4 miles. Sorry, I don't know how to translate that into kilometers. Michelle, I'll let you do that. You know, again, there is this aspect of the focus zone that includes light and air, the comfort of air, but also if you note on upper left, you'll see little sort of patterns in the ceiling. That's all acoustical metal decking. So the acoustical treatment is baked into the core and shell of this building, including those railings.
And in the notion of, you know, collaborating and working intensely with our engineer consultants, we had initially designed this space, this large space with columns, and working with our structural engineer early on, he said, well, do you really want those columns? Because we can design these trusses and allow for column-free space. And so we were able to design the 5 Vierendeel trusses that span 140 feet. And with that, just eliminate the number of columns in the space and provide that ultimate flexibility within this workspace. You can see the wraparound mezzanine, the wood panels that wrap around the mezzanine that surround this central space.
So that's showing you the book ledge, which they use quite a bit. You see people with their laptops there. They've got a lot of displays of books and other information.
The Keller jurists noted, and I think in relationship to this view in particular, that they were impressed with this large interior space that had the qualities of being outside, and that really impressed them. And I think when you're there, because it doesn't have direct beam and you get the views of the sky, you really sense the changing light levels in the day, from the morning light to the east, and then as the sun is sort of directly to the south, in some ways the light levels sort of dim until the late afternoon, when the light levels sort of pick up again with warmer sort of western light.
But one of the things we did for this focus area was to also design out glare. So there's exterior operable blinds that you saw in the video, and also on the sawtooth for certain, or the clear stories for certain times of the year, the goal being to eliminate the direct beam from getting to the focus zone. So again, in the buzz zone, you get some direct beam and user controlled light, get some diurnal circadian rhythm tuning in that area. This area is much more sort of a consistent stasis of light level that the building is responding to create.
And I think the other thing in the workplace was just having a variety of places for people to be able to work. So this is a zone that's 20 feet wide that surrounds the east, north, and west sides of the focus zone. And it's a double height space that kind of has a different, more vertical scale, although it's sort of contiguous with the mezzanine and connected to the central space, provides variety, which I think helps animate the workspace. And
this is in the buzz zone, so in a lounge area that we mentioned. So that type of program, it's right over the entry lobby. So really allowing the bones of the building to be exposed and not covered up with finishes is part of also our mantra of designing things out. We designed out fireproofing by leveraging code requirements so that it could also not only show the structure, but even the markings of the makers. So the appreciation for what humans make, as well as appreciation for nature. And all of this is, again, very in the detail scale of design. Light, air, and noise allowed us to make space for these important systems like the acoustical metal decking, or also for performance, for to really reach the level of sustainability, the LEED Platinum level, and energy consumption. It all has integrated insulation in these sandwich panels, which also ended up having a very quick construction schedule, as they just had to bring these prefabricated panels and erect them onto the steel in a really quick sequence.
But then that board form becomes the interior finish. And in terms of the sort of patterning, it's subtle, but as you get up closer to it, you see the quite beautiful imprint of the wood in the board form. So instead of being a drywall finish, it's all this kind of integral material. And
the design for the performance and the senses is an aspect that got leveraged at a range of different scales, including the location of this large duct work, for example, to not only provide the thermal comfort, but also create blockage for privacy for the people sitting below the mezzanine, and yet clear the views from the mezzanine. So we work a lot with sight lines in designing the section to define where things can be located to leverage their material presence for experiential benefits. So this is showing the detailing of the acoustic railing, again, unpacking what is creating the performance as well as the beauty. We do a lot of work to calibrate the location of sight lines and daylight. This is showing how we realize that by slightly tilting the clear stories, that 15 degrees, that is the degrees that allow them to be windows and not skylights from both a cost and complexity standpoint. But that also provided measurably more sky views. So you can see the way that translates on the plan. So you could, for example, define a furniture layout where you don't have very many sky views, like in the lighter tones, maybe you don't put as many pieces of furniture, for example, or where you have, where you would put an occluding object.
And just for a sense of scale, so on the right is the plan of the first level, and that's about 45,000 square feet. So it's just about an acre, maybe just over an acre. So a real challenge with a building like this, with that big a floor plate, is how to get daylight to the levels below. And so here you can see the 3 light wells and how the daylight can find its way down to that level, and also views up to the sky from below. And that gives a totally different scale to the building and provides connection to the outdoors no matter where you are within that large floor plate.
It also shows you that the plan logic is not always evident in terms of what actually happens at eye level. So, you might think that the area under that bridge, for example, on the upper right, would be a place that would be, the main occlusion, but actually that occlusion of views to the skies, it goes up to the north a little, to the south a little bit as well. So some of it is, when you hone in on these things, it starts to really inform the user experience. We worked closely with our engineers to tune the daylighting, and so what's really remarkable is how close the model on the upper slides matched the actual as-built false color photos.
And so much of it from the benefit of the exterior shades, which in the States are still not that common of an element, but it allowed us to really streamline the perimeter envelope and yet get great performance that responded to the changing light levels and just the daily circadian rhythms of the sunlight.
So going back to the sort of principles of light, one of the most inspiring objects to us is this quadrant designed by Ptolemy in the 2nd century. So there's just this timelessness about light, and it also represents taking all the complexities of light and the movement of the sun and mapping it into an object that you can hold in your hand. to tell time. That test is just, it's such a great example of translating nature into a design tool and into something that is, experienced. So since light really, at the scale of humans on the earth, it really is almost a scaleless material. And so you can see 1212 on the right. It has a very similar diagram to our house timepiece, which we built in 1999, and it's based on some theoretical work I was doing in grad school about shaping form with light, and inspired by Ptolemy's quadrant. But the zones of light that buzz buffer focus on 1212 is very similar in our home studio. We have a program that is defined by locations within light and also sectional thermal stacking as well. So our house, where our studio is, has this roof form that is defined by the movement of the sun through an oculus at the winter solstice. You can see more of this on our website. But essentially the slope and skew of these structural beams, these radial beams, is matching the altitude and azimuth of the sun. So again, nature shaping form in ways that we feel resonate with humans. When you look at that form, it just has a universal beauty to it, and it's not a willfully drawn form or constructed form. It's a mapping of natural forces.
And as the slide shows, the 38 degrees latitude, the Google project is at 37 degrees. So one thing that's interesting with this is just how familiar, kind of innately familiar we are with, when we go out to the Bay Area, the light levels in the time of day, the way the light operates in the seasons is something very, very familiar to us.
So this is a photograph taken with a fog machine. You'll see some other series we did. So it shows you too that the stair walls map the angle of the summer solstice light, and so the wall beyond is the equinox angle for this latitude, and those are the stairs up to Parabola Studio,
where we are right now.
Yeah, where we're sitting at this moment. And the roof form to the left is the wind defined by the winter sun. So it's bringing the mapping of light and sort of inverting it into the interior of the space. This is the level of experience we feel has infused our practice and our architecture with an awareness of this movement, this sort of, it's the constancy of light, but also the change that at our latitude, the Earth is spinning at 788 miles per hour. And that's very noticeable with the movement of a beam of light across the floor or wall. That's what that represents. So the mapping of light that occurs is something that year to year, it's very reliably in these positions. So at the equinox, it skims that wall to the studio. In the summer, when it gets to June, the beam moves its way along and then moves through the glass railing and shoots downstairs and skims those stair walls and back up.
So we have this kind of daily movement of the light, and then the seasonal movement north and south as the light beam moves and migrates. And one of the great joys of living here is just how, with the equinox and the solstices, the light beam does come into alignment with the markings. It's a very reassuring and comforting event every time. So
it sort of has this notion of being quite scientific in some ways. Some might say what's somewhat of like working with light is somewhat of a spiritual endeavor. To us, it's really bringing the beauty of nature into the day-to-day.
So like 1212, our house, because we were on a limited budget as well, has the kind of simplicity in the plan. It's almost like designing a vessel or a boat, where everything that we bring onto the site needs to be purposeful and essential.
So zooming back out in terms of the urbanism of it, it's downtown in Charlottesville, but Kevin had this vision before we bought the lot of what if someone built in the back more like a barn or a carriage house relative to these three big Victorian era houses. And that set into motion this collaborative joint venture with the neighbor and buying and redividing the lot. And our house is really hidden in plain sight, but it's like being in a tree house because it's surrounded by nature and set back from a busy street.
So it has this kind of overlay, certainly the biophilic qualities of of being in this house, and it's been an amazing place to be during the lockdown, but also the overlay of fitting and being responsive to the local culture and the history of Charlottesville.
And so these are things we applied to the work that we're doing and have developed in some ways both an innate understanding of the movement of light, but also the curiosity to understand each site in more depth before we begin to generate architectural responses.
So that's our presentation, and we'd love, if there's time, we'd love to answer any questions or have a conversation.
Oh, I just moved back to the, okay, I see the questions now. The water, okay, the water for, are you talking about for 1212, that question?
Yeah, I think so. That was, but I had mentioned it's qualifying for a LEED Platinum, so I imagine all that was considered.
Oh yes, it was.
At that point.
There's some gray water reuse. There's a full filtration area for flushing toilets, so that's using that. It's also using there is municipal recycled water that is coming to the building for those purposes as well. We have photovoltaics on the roof, which it's a whole other thing we could show you, but that's all there as well. But they are actually moving toward net zero. They're going to add more photovoltaics to the project because it's very close to net zero. Let's see the other one, byproduct of design. So biophilia is a principle that Google was studying already when we started by 1212 Bordeaux. It's in principle it's infused in our work, so there's a fittingness there, but it was not considered initially possible for a building with that budget and schedule at the time. And I think that was what I was trying to say earlier, by just having nature drive and sort of the laws of nature drive things in any architectural effort, it starts to emerge that with that type of principle without having to really have that be a set of principles you're checking a list off of.
I think that by focusing on experience, we found ourselves in alignment with so many of those biophilic principles. But we literally didn't have a biophilic checklist, nor did we really have a LEED checklist by our side in the earliest phases of design. We just kind of followed our experience and horse sense and the sense of our consultants and in doing things that really made sense from an integrated design standpoint. And then we used at the daylight testing, the modeling that Carrie showed, or other means to validate the sort of design based on principles that we started out with and embedded in the design from the get-go.
So like the focus, light, air, and noise that were the mantra, those were the things that we also would strive to find ways that fit into outdoor spaces or bringing outdoors in with light and incorporating view, like viewing the human experience of light, air, and noise, the senses, as being what we were designing to. And inevitably, because humans are part of nature, it really started to just naturally fit into those principles. And we understand it's important to provide these paradigms or living building challenge and the biophilic principles in order to guide teams and to, especially from a leadership of a company. We just, again, as I said at the beginning, those are not in themselves design tools. So the translation of those into design tools that then are translated into the built artifact is really the work of the architect and the team.
Great. I have a question for you. Well, there's one other one. I'll show that one first. It was, are there other ways of experiencing the water or the water element?
Other than the rills and the bioswales? No, in part because that area, they have a lot of drought in that area. It's not the kind of climate. We talked about water features for white noise, but it's a real onus on the evaporative loss of water, and for that climate, it was really not considered an appropriate extra step to take. And the other part, when we proposed the fountains, there was an aspect of the scale of Google, the maintenance that would be required for any moving water features. Now, if you look at on our website, the house that we did in California, we did use recirculating cistern water. We collected rainwater, and that recirculates through some runnels to create water features on that house. That's, again, it was a house, for a private client. That was something that we justified because it was also creating the cleaning, turbulence, recirculating the water, but also enjoying it along the way.
So the bioswales do kind of encircle the building and encircle the gardens, and then they're located within the gardens. So during the rainy season, Carrie noted, you do get a sense of water in collection, but it really varies as it goes into drought and unfortunately smoke season out in California with the wildfires.
So I'm looking at a question here about the building performance compared to design parameters. Actually, it's actually exceeded them because the building was designed for an engineer user, which would be like the highest energy user for Google, and the occupants there are not engineers. So that's one reason that the reality is a little better, but also as time has gone on, the kind of energy taken by the actual processors has also gotten to be more efficient. And I see the building to biophilic design results in challenge in procuring building materials at a reasonable cost. Ironically, the amount of wood you see in that building with those acoustic railings, part of it was leveraging the wood, for example, was also serving acoustical purpose and privacy purpose. But ironically, it's less square footage of wood than other Google buildings because it was all FSC certified and met all of the material requirements. We have our own. That's another thing we didn't mention. It was meeting at the time. It was called Porticos, Google's equivalent of the Red List. So all the materials in the building are non-toxic. One way we afford better materials is by designing out unnecessary materials. So we had this budget of materials that we essentially spent strategically.
And we were able to work with the interior fit out budget and use some of those dollars within the building core and shell budget. And our objective was to design in performance, sort of bake it into the design of the building so that no matter what future user came in, you'd always have excellent light, air, noise. So we put some of a premium from some of the interior budget, instead of coming in later as part of the interiors of adding acoustical panels to the ceilings, we paid a premium in the core and shell to use the acoustical decking. But that ensured, one, that you get the exposure and you get the ceiling coffers. You can use that to bounce daylight, but you always have great acoustics no matter what happens with future use.
Even during construction, it was a really quiet place.
In terms of feedback from the occupants, it's interesting. I think Carrie mentioned that the first users, we didn't know who the user would be when we started construction. It turned out the first user has been the real estate group, which has been really exciting because it means that as they're hiring design teams, builders, developers, everybody that they are looking to hire makes their way into the building. So some of the feedback that we've gotten is just experiential, people getting in touch with us, having toured the building, developers, builders, others coming through, just really, really blown away by the building and surprised that we were able to achieve that much. But also within that user group, the real estate and workplace services, they've done a lot of internal feedback and gotten a lot of internal feedback from users, which generally has been extremely positive from an experiential standpoint. The less formal is that we just repeatedly get the sense from people that they love going to work there and that they love the building and the experience. And
one of the things that you can't tell from looking at photos is just the quality of the acoustics. And that's one of the feedbacks we got from one of the executives that works there, who's a very practical person. You wouldn't expect him to really necessarily observe this, but he said, you know what I like most about this building, and we were thinking it would be something very practical. He said, I love the acoustical quality, the sound of it. It's got for a big high bay space, it's very quiet, and it's really impossible to communicate in any way except for in reality what the building feels like. But you do sense the going from buzz to focus when you move through those spaces, because there's also sound masking in the focus zone, which we again held budget for, and there's not sound masking in the buzz zone. So you really do, it's the ABCDs of acoustics, which is absorb, block, control, like sound masking, and diffuse, like the when you saw those slats bouncing, like scattering the sound. So it's a multivalent approach, but our goal is that every object have multiple contributions.
There's a great question about sense of smell. And, you know, you definitely, moving through the garden and going out to the enclosed garden, you certainly smell the wildflowers and all. You get the smells coming from the kitchen and such as you move in there. But one of the things you may have noticed is that although this would be a perfect building to have operable windows in, both on the elevations and also in the skylights, that's something that Google has not done in any of their designs. And it really goes back all the way to one of the founders, Larry Page's concern that actually the outdoor air quality is worse than the indoor air quality in the Bay Area, adjacent to the freeways, the brake dust, and catalytic converters. So they've just had a policy of creating enclosed buildings and then counteracting that by bringing in much greater degrees of ventilation air and filtered air, and then monitoring CO2. But so you don't get the sense of popping the window and getting the smells wafting through, which is unfortunate. But
they have about 4 to 6 air changes, or four air changes per hour in their buildings. They've cared about indoor air quality, but it is frustrating about the nat vent side of mixed mode. Another client of ours is letting us do that to bring, especially with the pandemic realm we're in, the importance of bringing outdoor air. The other thing I want to mention about the sense of smell is all the materials are non-toxic, and so like the paint that we use throughout the building is by Roma Bio. It's a mineral paint. And they've now become much more mainstream now that you can buy it, you know, in retail. But at the time, it was really nascent. But it actually absorbs toxins from the air, and it has no off-gassing. It produces a beautiful reflected light quality. So this sense of smell in some ways, again, is what you're not smelling. You're not smelling off-gassing from like concrete finishes from Prosecco, so it's all non-toxic. So it's the elimination of smell that is what we're after, and in the natural fragrance, like Kevin mentioned, of the garden.
It's a question about circadian lighting.
Okay, we didn't. Well, the Google has looked into various, I almost said artificial, but I guess constructed lighting and sound acoustical studies. On 1212, we're keeping it really simple. It does have daylight harvesting in the controls, in that when there's more daylight, those lights turn off. We're in those zones, but we weren't trying to replicate a static day and night. It is the circadian rhythms of the time. And I think the main thing is that when on the dark days, again, that climate is not quite as extreme as other latitudes, obviously, but people, by being able to go out in the garden or get that direct light in the garden and work outside more, that's sort of the contribution. But we did not do any internal lighting measures.
Kind of compared to other uses and kind of the transition of the culture at Google, they really are pretty much a 9-to-5 company. They don't have, at least in this building, in this area, they don't have a lot of late night work. So, and through most of the year, there's just not that much reliance on artificial lighting, certainly on the upper floors, some down below.
So Michelle, you're asking a question about the technologies. Oh, actually, I should mention a technology that's there that's now quite relevant is in order to measure CO2, this building has a whole series of sensors. So they were doing it initially to measure for performance, because like in meeting rooms, when you have a lot of people, when the CO2 builds up, the Harvard study proved how that diminished productivity makes people more drowsy. Now that we're in this pandemic realm, or post-pandemic, and beyond, I should say, the CO2 has become a stand-in potentially for viral load, for measuring a potential for aerosol transmission. So I think it's more right now, I'd say that I think it's great. They were doing it for this living lab reason, but I think to have more buildings with CO2 sensors would help users to be able to perceive the invisible characteristics of their indoor air.
It's a great question about the available technologies. So we designed this in 2016 and construction was during 2017. We had to make a really early call on the steel structure and the precast. Concurrent with that timing, or just as we were finishing our building, Google was making a pretty concerted push in exploring mass timber. So literally just across the way, across a channel, there's a mass timber building that's under construction, designed by Michael Green from Michael Green Architects from Vancouver. And it's a similar scale project and was certainly informed by 1212 in terms of the section and sort of the dispensation of the spaces, but it is part of their pretty deep exploration towards mass timber and carbon considerations. The other thing that happened was this building, as a living lab, there was a campus nearby that has 4 of these modules, slightly adjusted and further exploration and different means of glazing and all, but kind of the bone structure of the building has been implemented and is under construction right now. So this kind of seed crystal,
contractor.
Seed crystal has grown for Google.
And another architect colleague was working on that project because we moved on to a different project with Google at that time. But this idea of scaling 1212 is part of the whole prototype idea. So they took it, they kept a lot of what we had started, but they also wanted to continue exploring like alternatives to exterior operable blinds. What about electrochromic glass, and that, which has its drawbacks. But ideally, this idea of a company like Google being able to build a prototype that is scalable, like in addition to the larger, more expensive campuses they're doing, just that this building represents something that we're seeing, we've learned, but also people who visited have learned things that will allow this idea to be scaled, or these qualities to be scaled, focusing on great daylight and healthy materials and biophilia.
I'm unmuting myself. Sorry, I've been busy trying to keep up with the questions. I might just ask the last couple ones because it's quick. Sorry, I had a question. So when people think of biophilic design, they always see pictures, and we showed them at the beginning, of like an overabundance of plants and internal plants. Was there any discussion or decision process to include or exclude a lot of plants inside?
Oh, good question. They have a lot of plants inside. They actually, Google, this is not just at 1212, but Google has a whole vendor that brings indoor plants in and tends to them, and some external planters on the terrace. So that's very much part of their ethos.
We had access to photograph and film the building right before they moved in and right before the plant people moved in. Yeah, so it's the unplanted version that you see in these.
I think the kitchen, the cafe shot had you saw some racks with plants on it. So there was a little bit of that for that photo shoot. But there are more plants than what you saw in our images, for sure.
There's a question about oh, sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say there's one last. We'll take one last question on the solid gypsum for interior division panels. If you have any comments on that, and then.
Definitely a comment. It's one of the reasons why we really focused on the perimeter of that innovation that Carrie showed of the board form sandwich panels that provided the exterior finish. We really interior finish and exterior. That we really wanted to drive out the use of drywall as much as possible, and it goes all the way back to just discussions with the founders years ago. They just see drywall as kind of a stupid material. So we wanted to get that out. It is used within the interior partitions, but probably to a much lesser percentage because we didn't have to clad the perimeter walls.
It's just so hard to find anything that's that ubiquitous. I mean, someone hopefully will design that out. We did look at phase change options, and all of that was just really out of budget. We looked at, there's certainly other like cementitious materials that weren't quite proven technology, but I think it would be good for us to look at the percentage of gypsum in it compared to a conventional building that does have the whole interior finish with framed out steel studs and gypsum. The contractor described it as design on top of design. Most buildings have like the structure, then they have a layer of drywall, then they have wood or some other finish added on. So we design these layers out, and so what you're seeing is also it's the minimum amount of finish for what you need to accomplish.
And if you remember in the section, the way that the mezzanine sort of wraps around in U shape, underneath the mezzanine, we had designed we designed initial enclosures for meeting rooms, but also future enclosures that they could use a demountable panelized system. And on other projects, we've done that in similar locations. So you can use glass or solid panels and kind of come in over the weekend and fit out the building. And we really like that approach. It certainly has some cost implications, but the flexibility is great. And again, I think it's a great question about sort of minimizing the drywall and more inflexible materials.
Great. I've got one more question to wrap up. I'm trying to get this to look properly. Just given that a lot of people are probably just new to biophilic design, if they want to do more of this kind of design, where would you recommend that they start? What would be the first 1 or 2 steps to take if they wanted to implement, infuse this into their design practice?
I recommend tuning up your sense of observation, going out in nature, doing something really pure and deep in understanding whether it's the site you're working on or just repetitive observation. Kevin's a photographer. He does it often through that medium. I tend to like in grad school, especially, I was making little thought experiments to just study a pure sort of a concept of light and shadow, or how to like work with your hands to mock up some material processes or work with clay or other things. I think starting there and understanding, like with this house and shaping form with light. When I started, I had, again, this was in the early 90s, I had just sun charts. There was no internet for mapping. There was no, Revit or Rhino or anything. But the question I was asking myself was, how can I shape form with light? And I knew I could know where light would be any time of day for any latitude, any time of year. But how does that translate into shaping form? So I started thinking, for example, of that the angles in architecture, like you have floor, ramp, stair, wall, or it could be roof, it's different angles that are in architecture. And I was trying to find the corollary in sun angles. So that's why the roof and the stairs have this coincidence with light. So there's just this way of trying to ask those questions that I think is a fundamental starting point.
Yeah, I agree with Carrie, and I think that her first point about the observational, I think, is really important. It was interesting because we were located in Charlottesville, and we would fly out for meetings and to do site reviews and all. And we found, by being remote, we actually spent more time on site. It was very precious for us during our trips to go to the site in off hours, early morning, or at sunset, or in the evening to see the night sky, or just on the weekends. We'd almost kind of camp out there, and much greater degree than the people that lived more proximate to the site. And I think I would just really encourage that. It's not necessarily, the checklists are great, the literature that Michelle showed and resources that you can find are great, but I think that inherent observation of nature and really beginning to understand and care for and love the place, I think, is what's going to instill the best kind of biophilic design effort.
I think in our experience, design is a process of uncovering more than anything else.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned it's about taking things away and distilling down to like the essence of what you really need, and then you by default are designing out all of the extra and the waste, etc.
Yep. And carbon, exactly. Yep.
Well, I'm so thrilled you guys shared time with us today. Thank you so much for getting up early and sharing with us this project. We really greatly appreciate it. Seeing more behind the scenes, we can read about articles about it, but then seeing more of the thought process, I think, is really insightful. So with that, thank you so much from GreenEd, and to everyone watching, if you're still there, reach out to us if you have any comments or feedback or potential topics. We'd love to hear from and look at how we can bring topics to you that you're interested in. So with that, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay.